It is Newstalk ZB with Chris Lynch, and joining us this morning is Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. Good morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it. Let's discuss what New Zealand could look like potentially after Alert Level 4 is reduced. What are your initial thoughts on what it could look like?
While we don't yet know when it will be, eventually we will obviously move to Alert Level 3. And you'll remember when we put out the framework, we already gave a really broad sense of what it will look and feel like. I'll be giving out much more detail later today, but one thing I will just flag is that we're at that level because of the risk that we're still trying to combat. There will still be significant restrictions on your interaction with other people. And so if you think about the need to keep doing that, you'll get a bit of an idea of what life will still be like. But it will be different to level 4. And so I'll be giving details on what it means for education, for workplaces, for commerce, for retail, and for travel, for instance.
Small to medium-sized businesses are doing it really tough at the moment. In fact, many businesses are. They're worried that once this lockdown is over, they may not even survive. I think that's the reality now, and I know that Grant Robinson's touched on that as well as being a reality. What would you say to them at this given time?
We know that our small and medium-sized enterprises in particular are vulnerable, and so that's why you will have seen that we've focused quite a bit of what we've done to make sure that we can support them. The wage subsidy, just to try and make sure that we're helping with that cost of workforce. Mm-hmm. The second area, we know that fixed cost of those who may have rented properties or lease arrangements. Trying to do what we did for rentals, and that is at least give that extra flexibility. So rather than 10 days where you may find yourself in arrears and in trouble, extending that to 30 days. And then also tax changes that will have an effect for a lot of SMEs that we announced yesterday too. So they really have been a big focus for us.
Prime Minister, what I'm keen to hear from you about is that delicate and no doubt fine balancing act that takes place to decide on the health needs of the population versus the economic impact. Take me through what that looks like and how that works for you as Prime Minister of New Zealand.
Well, I think when all of us have the benefit, the very, very sad benefit of New Zealand experiencing this later than others. And in part that was because of what we did. Border controls have helped slow that down for us. But you see other countries now who are in lockdown extending their lockdowns, and that's because they went in late. Often because, of course, they were at the front line of COVID. And so you'll see those lockdowns now extending in some places for up to 2 months or more. Now, that's in part led to our framework, which is not only is our health outcomes better if we try and eliminate COVID, but our economic outcomes go hard, go early, keep it short and sharp, with the goal of not having to end up back there or end up there for longer. So actually, our approach helps both, and we've constantly kept that lens of both in the decisions we've been making as well.
It must be a really hard balancing act because we're seeing now in some countries, they've relaxed the rules somewhat, but then wave 2 comes along. So it must be an absolute nightmare because no one model is the same for a country, is it?
No, you're right. And, when I look at those other countries, and I've spoken to a couple of leaders in other countries, most recently the Prime Minister of Denmark, and that was one of the things we discussed, what will the future look like if there are second waves of infections? How long will that continue for? Because even though the numbers have been devastating in some of these countries, actually the percentage of the population who has had COVID is still being relatively small. So it means that they are living in a world of constantly having to manage its existence until there's a vaccine. That's why we've wanted to have the goal of the Eliminate strategy, because it means that we can try, although we put a lot of effort in up front, we can try and actually get to a place where we minimise the daily effect of COVID-19 on our lives. So that's something unique for us and probably a small handful of other countries, Taiwan and places. So countries like Singapore and Australia, places like Taiwan and Hong Kong.
Some New Zealanders have complained about price gouging. I know the Herald had a story last night. It's not all bad news. There has been some confidence for the food sector too. I want to make that very, very clear. As the lockdown continues, do you think the country will see a reduction in the number of complaints coming through about alleged price gouging?
I think and we've wanted to be really live to that, but particularly because there's less competition in the market at the moment. But actually, from what I've seen, when we've raised issues, we've been very quick to get responses and explanations. One of the things is I think actually we're probably all much more attuned to what's happening at the moment. And so what are usually some quite significant seasonal variations now, the question is it price gouging or is it just an issue of seasonal produce, for instance? And I think the fact that things like cauliflower have come up points to the fact that there's often that's at play. You might remember, long before lockdown, remember that kumara were really expensive some time ago, and there was a lot of chat about that. And again, often some of what's being raised is not price gouging, but just seasonal and supply issues.
I have to ask, do your daily briefings ever discuss progress reports on vaccines? Is that something that any of your advisors are saying, here's an update from Switzerland, here's an update from Japan?
It's not as regular as that, but I do get insights into the global research environment, and New Zealand is a part of that research network, and it's not all vaccines. In some cases it will also be potential drugs for treatment. In fact, our Health Research Council and the Ministry of Health will be making some announcements discussing New Zealand's role in some of those fields tomorrow, so you get a bit of a sense of that. But when it comes to vaccines, I see reports that say the same things in the public domain, that really at the earliest people are still talking about 12 months. And what we need to give some thought to is when it is available, what can we make sure we're pre-planning for to access vaccine for New Zealand as quickly as possible. So that's something we are putting thought into now.
Prime Minister, I was talking to some of our colleagues and our clients at NZME here yesterday and asking how they're getting on. And one thing they did say to me is if there's one thing that's good that comes from the lockdown is they're being forced to slow down. You know, they can't race around the city doing various meetings. They're forced to actually sit at their kitchen table and do the likes of Zoom, or they're forced to go out and enjoy nature. And if there's a bit of blue sky, they'll be out there walking their dogs. And I just wondered, without sounding namby-pamby, there are probably some things that New Zealanders can actually appreciate or try to as we continue this lockdown, I think. And that is the small things, without sounding ridiculous, like exercise and nature.
No, I think it's true. I think there's real truth in that. And, the fact that I think probably neighbours, people are getting to know one another as they pass each other at a 2-metre distance. And I think we're probably quite aware of each other and each other's needs as well. Some of the stories I hear of what people are doing to reach out to the vulnerable and isolated is really heartwarming, and I get lots of those stories.
How's your bubble going?
My bubble was very well, thank you. And working. I'm predominantly working at the Beehive, but I do work from home in the evenings, and I'm seeing more of Neve than I usually do, and that's one of those things that you talk about. Seeing more of her in her milestones, because she's at an age where she's changing so much. So that's, if I were to give a silver lining, that's one for me. Yeah,
one positive thing from lockdown. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, thank you very much for your time this morning. We look forward to your daily briefings later in the afternoon. Thank you.
Look after yourself.